Greetings, it's time for Top 10 at Cedar Point. So I reviewed the feedback I received from my last Top 10, and I just want to thank everyone for the constructive comments. Seems that the general consensus that y'all prefer the longer style videos, so this Top 10 is going to be a bit more detailed and thorough. Okie dokie, let's go. At number 10, we got Corkscrew. I don't have a ton to say about this ride, but overall, it's a charming old school coaster. The first drop is awesome towards the back, and this thing has two freaking ejector hills. It's an aero looper for crying out loud. Mind you, one of the first aero loopers. In fact, it was the first ever modern roller coaster to go upside down 3 times. But beyond the drop and the ejector hills, this coaster has your standard aero vertical loop and the iconic double corkscrew that goes over the midway. It's super picturesque and visually appealing, but the actual ride experience is kinda just okay. You don't traverse the corkscrews fast enough to feel rushing speed, but you also don't go slow enough to get good hang time either. The ride's not too extremely bumpy and jolty, but it can be quite rough and maybe a bit painful depending on how tall you are. Overall, I'll take this coaster over Rougarou, mainly because of the intense airtime hills and vertical loop. At number 9, we got Wild Mouse. Wild Mouse is the newest coaster to open at Cedar Point, and though it's simply a Zamperla spinning Wild Mouse, Cedar Point actually did a pretty decent job with this one. It's got some original theming for being such a generic and widely used ride model, with each individual car being a different character, and the ride even includes on-ride audio to an extent, as well as themed auto-spiel messages delivered by each of the mouse characters. As for the ride experience, spinning mouse coasters are far superior to regular non-spinning Wild Mouse coasters, so that's already a plus. On one of my rides, our car was extremely unbalanced, and we got some of the most insane spinning I've ever experienced, leaving us extremely dizzy at the end, and it was such a fantastic experience. On the other rides I got on this coaster, our car was pretty balanced, and it can be quite a mild and sometimes uneventful experience, so it will definitely vary every time you go on this coaster. Nonetheless, it's still a fun and cute addition to Cedar Point. But at what cost? Number 8, I'm going with Raptor. This might be a shocking placement given how low I've placed it, but I'm gonna be honest here. Raptor is kinda underwhelming, especially compared to the majority of the other B&M inverts in the country. If you want to hear more about my thoughts on the inverts specifically, then feel free to check out my video ranking my top 10 favorite B&M inverted coasters. But back to Raptor, this coaster has some strange straight sections that just kinda disrupt the flow and pacing of the ride, and the inversions aren't exactly the whippiest or the most intense. It's still a fairly intense coaster and pulls a decent amount of positive G-forces, but out of all my rides on Raptor, I never grayed out at any point during the ride. The first time I visited Cedar Point in 2021, I only rode this coaster once, and it was in the front row. During my second visit a few weeks ago, I went for the back edge seats, riding on both edges during different parts of the day. After finally experiencing Raptor in the back edge seat a few times, I can safely say that this coaster is not incredible, but still a moderately fun and intense roller coaster. Number 7, Blue Streak. I'm not lying to you guys when I say that Blue Streak is aggressive. Blue Streak is aggressive. And better than Ghost Rider. This little coaster features several airtime hills, each of which deliver insane ejector airtime, especially when sitting in the front row. This is also a super old ride, so don't expect it to be smooth. The janky roughness of this coaster honestly adds to the experience in my opinion, as it offers a much more out of control feeling and amplifies the intensity. The turnaround halfway through the ride offers decent laterals, and the first drop is fun towards the back. Though it's a short, rough, and sometimes forgotten little wooden coaster, Blue Streak is seriously a fantastic ride. It's underrated, and I would highly recommend checking it out. Number 6, Millennium Force. Another shocking placement for some is going to be Millennium Force, the first ever Giga coaster. I'll admit that this coaster grew on me substantially as I rode it many more times during my recent week-long vacation. However, I can still find the lackluster experience at some parts of this ride. Before I completely disappoint you, I'll go ahead and first discuss the pros of this ride. Every Giga coaster I've been on features a truly incredible first drop. That even includes Orion and Intimidator 305. And Millennium Force is no exception. Every row is a great row going down the drop, and I was able to experience it in the very front and the second to back seat. The bottom of the first drop and the first overbank is super intense and caused me to gray out every single time I rode it, which is consistent with my 2021 experience. The airtime hills definitely hit in the front row, and speaking of the front row, Millennium Force is hands down a front row ride, as you can really feel that speed as the wind is plastering your face the entire ride. You never feel it slow down, and it just feels like it's flying the whole time. And this leads me to the cons of this coaster. Yes, the pacing is fantastic, but the elements you traverse are pretty uneventful. There's 3 moderate floater hills, and everything else is either a forceless overbank turn or straight track. It isn't an aggressive coaster in the slightest, and it can honestly feel somewhat boring during certain parts of the ride, especially if you're sitting in any row except for the front. So overall, Millennium Force has its strengths, but it also certainly has its weaknesses. At number 5, we've got Val Raven. Val Raven was my first ever B&M dive coaster, and still remains my favorite dive coaster I've been on out of the 5 that I've been on. That was an awkward sentence. It has an amazing first drop, a super intense Immelman, a fun 0G roll thingy towards the end, and even a floater airtime hill. Both main drops offer great airtime towards the back, but this is definitely a front row ride. The edge seats are also super fun given the absence of a track or floor beneath your feet, and your distance from the heartline of the track. A while back, I made a controversial Coasters with Contriver video explaining my thoughts and reasoning as to why I think Val Raven is better than Millennium Force, so feel free to check that video out after this one. Number 4 is Gatekeeper. I was about to say that Gatekeeper is one of the most iconic Cedar Point coasters given the fact that it is literally built into the front entrance of the park, but realistically, half this list is a Cedar Point icon. Anyways, Gatekeeper is a remarkable and underrated experience in my opinion. It's super fun, super smooth, and moderately intense. The wing over drop is fantastic, especially in the front row, as it offers a trippy and unique sensation. Plenty of coasters in the world can give you ejector airtime on a first drop, but there's not a whole lot that can give you hang time on a first drop. The bottom of the first drop causes me to gray out every time, and the various inversions on the ride are super duper fun, especially when riding on a wing seat. The ride was noticeably rattlier than my first time riding Gatekeeper, so I can't necessarily argue that this is the smoothest B&M I've been on anymore, but it's still nothing that will cause pain or discomfort. Speaking of which, I believe that B&M vest restraints are far superior to old school B&M shoulder restraints. Just saying. Anyways, Gatekeeper always offers a sensational experience and is easily my absolute favorite B&M at Cedar Point. Third on this list is going to be Magnum XL200. Before I talk about this ride, I want to give an honorable mention to Top Thrill Dragster, as this coaster is now technically defunct and it was formerly my number 3 in the park. Rest in peace. Anyways, Magnum XL200 is probably the coaster that had the most drastic movement in my overall coaster ranking since my visit in 2021. This coaster admittedly is super duper rough and can kind of crush your thighs. However, the ejector airtime on this ride is just it's horrifying. I don't know any adjective to describe it. It's messed up, it's aggressive, it's exhilarating, it's intense, it's ferocious, it's just stupid. In a good way. Aero was on crack when this ride was designed, and it's honestly one of the best hypercoasters period. I definitely need to re-rank my hypers after having ridden it several more times recently. The Magic Seat, which is row number 3, is proven to be godlike, and every time I ride this coaster, it ended in hysterical laughter because this ride just doesn't make sense. Second place will be Maverick. Speaking of rides that just don't make sense, we have Maverick, the first ever roller coaster that I made a 60-second review about, and Maverick definitely remains unchanged in terms of how I had remembered it from my first ever visit to Cedar Point. Speaking of which, Maverick was also my first coaster I got to ride at Cedar Point. Yay. Maverick is freakishly aggressive. Definitely the most intense roller coaster at Cedar Point, no questions asked. Each turn is aggressive beyond comprehension. The airtime is marvelous. The second launch feels way faster than it really is. I really don't have much bad to say about this ride at all. It's just amazing in every way. The restraints don't even bother me. It's smooth as frick. The operations are great. I guess the only thing is maybe the ride duration? Maybe? And I guess that's really what's separating this coaster from my number 1, which, I mean, come on, if you've made it this far into the video, then I'm sure you can piece together what my number 1 is. That's right, only a state-of-the-art hybrid coaster can claim the number 1 spot, Gemini. Yeah, of course, I'm just kidding. I'm talking about the real best hybrid coaster at Cedar Point, Cedar Creek Mine Ride, Steel Vengeance. If I had $1 for every time I said the name Steel Vengeance on my YouTube channel, I probably have enough money to fly back to Cedar Point just so I can ride this work of art several more times. I have nothing but positive things to say about this ride. There literally isn't a single thing I dislike about Steel Vengeance. It has amazing airtime, amazing inversions, it's fairly intense, it has a ridiculous ride duration with ridiculous pacing. The loose article system is great because it allows for incredible dispatch times without forcing you to spend money. It's very picturesque and beautiful. This ride has lore and an actual backstory with some subtle theming. It's just perfect. It literally is. You can say it's overrated as much as you want, but you aren't going to change my opinion. In 2021, I managed to get 5 rides on Steel Vengeance, as well as 5 rides on Maverick, but during my most recent visit, I secured a total of 13 rides on Maverick and 17 on Steel Vengeance across 5 days. All 5 days, I scored a last ride of the night on Steel Vengeance, 2 of those being in pitch blackness. Vengeance was already my absolute number 1 coaster prior to my week-long vacation, but after one-upping my last experience with freaking night rides on this masterpiece, I loved it even more. Speaking of previous experiences, the first time I ever went to Cedar Point, I only got to ride it towards the back. I believe all 5 of my rides were in the last 2 cars. However, during my most recent visit, I got 2 rides in the very front row and a good amount of rides in the very last row, and I gotta say, row 12 on Steel Vengeance, oh my god. I also got to experience Steel Vengeance in row 6, which, I mean, if you've ridden an RMC before, I'm sure you know that row 6 is known as the boring seat because it gives you the least airtime. But on Steel Vengeance, even row 6, the least exciting row on any RMC, still manages to be far superior than Ghost Ride, or any other roller coaster for that matter. Every time I ride Steel Vengeance, I love it more and more, and there's never a time where I get off this ride and I'm like, alright, I don't want to ride it anymore. This coaster is truly a work of art, and I still don't see how Iron Gwazi compares to this ride. Like, come on, it's nowhere near as good. I swear, I'm not hating on Gwazi. Iron Gwazi is my number 5 out of 227 credits. And before I go on that debate, I'm just gonna say that I kinda already did that with my video comparing Steel Vengeance to Iron Gwazi. And while on that topic, if you are curious to hear more of my thoughts on Vengeance, I spent a significant amount of time talking about it in my video ranking Cedar Point's coasters by intensity from 2021. I also have a 60-second review of Steel Vengeance and even a short vlog showing my initial reaction from my first ever ride on this thing. So anyways, with all that said, Steel Vengeance is simply the greatest coaster at Cedar Point, and for that matter, the entire country. So that's my current top 10 at Cedar Point. I do plan on returning next year, mainly to experience the new reimagined Topical Jackster, but also to experience Steel Vengeance many more times, as well as the other amazing coasters Cedar Point has to offer. Stay tuned for more videos like this one. I plan on uploading a little more often than I have been. But anyways, thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.